Well, welcome along to this video, which we're calling Property Management Perspective for First-Timer Landlords. And to discuss this, I'm joined by Adam Joseph, CEO of the Happy Tenant Company, which is a bespoke property management company in London and the M25. And Adam, it's so gratifying for us at Property Tribes to see so many new landlords starting out in 2019. Lots of discussions on the forums of people that are just taking their first steps, despite all the regulation and taxation and so on. And I think for them, understandably, their focus is very much on the acquisition and buying the property, but actually they need to be thinking more about what happens when they actually complete on that property and start renting it out.
Well, a lot of people say that's where the journey starts. Once the tenant moves into the property, it's very difficult to predict what maintenance issues may arise, and they may arise because of the age of the property, or they just may arise, just these things happen. And they need to be mindful that perhaps they need to leave some money in a pot for a rainy day. Boilers do break down, leaks happen. And it's normally the landlord's responsibility to fix them as quickly as possible. They may not always have time to get 4 or 5 quotes and find the contractor that they quite like the look of. Sometimes things have to be dealt with immediately. And not all landlords have access to those types of suppliers, those types of maintenance people. And when they do, you know, how well do they know them? Can they be trusted? Do they have insurance? What sort of comeback is there if they don't do the job as they quoted for? And I think having a management company act for you, act in your best interest, I think you do safeguard against that, because they're the people that you'll go back to, and they're the ones that have the relationship with the maintenance company, and they're the ones that can make sure that the work is being carried out satisfactorily and as quickly as possible.
Well, you've made some very valid points there, and I think, you know, in this day and age when there's such competition for tenants, that one thing that all landlords can do to encourage tenants to stay longer is to act promptly when there are repair and maintenance issues. Now, in fact, landlords have a legal obligation to act within certain timeframes. So again, good property management, it's, you know, you're talking over a very long term. You could have a tenant with you for 4, 5, 7 years. It's not something to be taken lightly.
No, it's not. And what we often find is when a tenant is in a property for 4 or 5 years, you'll be amazed how many tenants don't alert the landlord to issues in the property, whether it's condensation or it's a small leak which they can live with. Quite often they don't let a landlord know. If the landlord's getting his rent every month, the tenant's not calling him, he thinks everything is running smoothly because the rent's there, he's not being bothered by the tenant, he thinks everything's going great. And you'd be amazed how many times we speak to landlords who haven't inspected a property after 3, 4 or 5 years. We would always advise, even with the best tenant in the world who you are really confident is never going to cause a problem, to always do either 6 monthly or 12 monthly inspections at the very latest. Whether or not you do it yourself or whether you instruct your managing agent to do it, it's important to have something noted just for your peace of mind. And you never know what happens at the end of a tenancy. Sometimes deposit disputes arise. Nobody intended them to happen, but when you're talking about a deposit in London, which is often 6 weeks the rent, it's a lot of money, and it can be quite a contentious point if a tenant feels that you are going to make a deduction which maybe is not justified.
Indeed. And I think the other thing to consider is the compliance angle, because I think I'm right in saying that there are now over 160 government statutes and regulations that landlords have to be compliant to. A newcomer landlord may not be aware of all of these obligations. They don't have tenant management skills, they may not have the contacts. So actually starting out with a property management company on their side, holding their hand, even if they intend to self-manage later down the line, it's a very safe way to start getting into the part of the cycle where you're managing the property and the tenancy.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The compliance side is obvious. You know, they need to know what the responsibilities are, but just managing the relationship between a landlord and tenant it's a very difficult thing to manage. It's an emotional issue from the tenant's point of view because it's their home. It's a commercial issue for you, for the landlord, because it's your investment. I would say at the very least they should join one of the governing bodies, whether it's the NLA, which is the National Landlords Association, because they have an advice line, and also they can provide you with the right notices and the right contracts which will help guide you.
And indeed, and Property Tribes is partnered with the RLA, but we always say you should join at least 2 landlord associations because you get different flavours.
Sure.
And they offer different levels of service for different things. I think that's absolutely vital. I'm always encouraging landlords, even newbie landlords starting out, to join a landlord association. I think it's a very positive thing to do. We talked about how good property maintenance can keep tenants happy, make them stay longer. I think the other thing to sort of say about property management is that if you maintain your property, you're maintaining the asset value, and also you're obviously going to achieve the highest possible rents. So when, actually landlords shouldn't feel bad when they get a maintenance thing come in. They've got responsibilities, they've got to maintain the property, and a lot of it's tax deductible.
Yes, and I think it's important for them to know, or to be confident about the company that they're paying, the maintenance company they're using, and have as much information as possible so they know whether it's just wear and tear on a property, or maybe a tenant has misplaced something or broken something. I think it's important for them to have this information. And if they're using a managing agent, I think it's important for them to have as much transparency as they can, especially on the invoicing side, because I think, those maintenance bills can stack up. And one way of keeping them down is by having transparency so they understand what they're paying for. And I think it's also worth landlords asking their managing agents whether or not they're taking any commissions from their maintenance companies. This does seem to be quite standard, especially in London. I'm not judging it one way or the other, but I think a landlord has a right to know whether they're paying a premium on top of that invoice, which is going to the agent and is not actually benefiting them.
Indeed. And I guess just to wind this up, Adam, what sort of things, what sort of advice would you give to a newcomer landlord about choosing a property management company? What sort of things should they be looking for, such as membership of a trade association, that kind of thing?
Well, the first thing, yes, I would make sure they're regulated. That's 100%. They've got to be regulated. Make sure they have client money protection in place. And I think if I was a landlord instructing a managing agent, I'd want to know that there is a human that I can speak to. There's a lot of these prop tech companies which are coming out, and they are all offering property management of one sort or another. But I think what people find on closer inspection is that there isn't anybody there to talk to. There are technicians and certainly IT consultants, and the software looks very impressive, but managing property, as I've said, is an emotional issue, and sometimes you just need a human being to manage that relationship and manage those discussions in the most fair and transparent way.
Well, I absolutely love that you have ended on the topic of the importance of people in property, because property is a people business. It's so much about building relationships, and I think, newcomer landlords coming to the sector, they need to be aware that it is a people business, and they need to work with the right people for them and their property.
Yes, no, I totally agree. It's a people business, as you said. It's about relationships. And we have always enforced that from the very beginning, and that's why all our landlords have their own dedicated property manager. It's not a call centre, so when they call up, they'll speak to the same person every time who'll understand how they like to look after their property.
Fantastic. Well, I think it's been a really interesting discussion, Adam. Thank you for joining me. And do check through the discussions in the property management category, because we're going to be adding more content over the coming weeks and months. And also, of course, if you've got a question about property management, then please start a new thread. And finally, if you're watching this on YouTube, thanks very much for watching, but please do pop along to propertytribes.com. That is where our discussions are hosted. And indeed, if you've got any questions for Adam on property management, you can post your question on Property Tribes.